Well, let me give you an example of like just the basic questions between like a criminal situation and a restorative situation. If you're charged with a crime, the questions is one, was there a crime that was committed? Who committed the crime? And what are we going to do to punish the person who did? With restorative justices, was there a harm? Who was harmed? And what can we do to repair the harm?
The restorative justice and transformative justice are both approaches that are not based in punishment, banishment, alienation. They're efforts to approach, issues of conflict, mistreatment, abuse, violence.
Talking about the juvenile justice system and shutting those systems of oppression down, and in their place creating restorative rehabilitation, reentry centers within communities and things like that help a person and restore a person so that when they go back into the community, they restore the community.
These are actually concrete tools that youth are using together to find mediation, to find conflict resolution, and I think we do a disservice by not bringing these things into our schools.
There's basically several elements that are go to the integrity of what the peace circle is. One is the use of a talking piece, something that has an importance to the keeper or the people who are in the circle. The keeper is the person who facilitates the circle. So whoever has a talking piece gets to speak, and whoever doesn't gets to listen. It doesn't go backwards and forwards. So it allows for really good listening within a circle, and allows people who don't usually talk to be able to also have an opportunity to talk. It's also, circles are value-based. In other words, that the people who come together in the circle establish or create values in order to make it a safe place, the safest kind of place to be able to bring your best self forward. So the decisions in the circle are made by consensus. So the values for the circle are decided by consensus by those participating in the circle.
Today we were training a group of probation officers and parents of young people who are on probations. The training came about with the probation officers needing some other tools to use with the young people that they have in their caseload, and because they work so closely with the parents or the families, they invited parents to be circle keepers as well, because that's the objective. After this 4-day training, these women, and they happen to be all women, but there are men that we train as well, they will be starting their of becoming circle keepers. It's a great tool for anyone that holds court with young people or in the community. You have teachers that are circle keepers, police officers, parents. You have all kinds of folks that can use the circle process if they're dealing with bringing people together or repairing any kind of harm.
Initially, we were asked to keep circles at a Chicago Housing Authority site because of all the movements that have been happening in Chicago with residents coming from housing authority sites that have been shut down. Young people were fighting. People were coming from very different cultures, though it was all a similar kind of center. And from Chicago Housing Authority, it was difficult for residents to be supported in building a new community again. So we began circles once a week with about 20 women, ranging ages from 6 to 60s, sharing stories about our experiences and our commonalities and how connected we actually were.
Really coming back to movement building and community organizing, which are words and that often aren't brought into conversations around resisting violence, because I think traditionally the social service world is trained and kind of constructed to think about, well, that's simple, we call the police. That's simple, we, get some other government agency involved to address these matters without really interrogating how these institutions, good intentions or bad, are in grave dysfunctional, and just repeat the violence and the business of oppression in so many ways. It really comes down to prioritizing relationship building and movement building over everyone just kind of siphoning off and doing whatever their business is, and measuring success by, how many arrests you made this week of these particular type of arrests, or how many patients you had in your space, or how many people you served and having these kind of numbers games, but actually looking at the totality of people's lives and people's communities.
I've noticed that specifically with the community center group, the women have been organizing a lot more activities out in the community. So I feel like that's in some ways a byproduct of having a safe community building site to look forward to every week.
You know, I just finished a circle at a school, and when we finished, the parents said, "This was really great. I feel really human." And so I went on to ask her, "Well, what did you mean by that?" She says, "Because I came here, I was very angry with the principal. I was very upset with my children because I have to come to the school because they're fighting." But she said, sitting in circle, having the meeting in circle, gave her an opportunity to just talk and be heard. She felt like she was being heard because when she talked, only she was talking and nobody else talked because she had to talk in peace. She also felt like it was a place where she not only talked about her children's experience in the school, certain questions we asked in the circle, during the circle, she got to express things that she needed to express from herself. You see, in a meeting like that, if she was in the principal's office, there'd be a lot of blame, there'd be a lot of yelling, there'd be a lot of how should we punish the young people, the student. But in circle, there is no blaming. Unless we're doing a conflict circle, and conflict circle is different. It is when there's a conflict, so you have a victim and you have an offender. But in a general circle where we take and have a meeting in a circle, or we decide something in a circle, people are heard. Issues are put out, and we'll just talk. We become a community.
Well, I think the current justice system is really based in punitive and retributive justice, which means that it's really oriented toward crimes are viewed as crimes against the state, and it's really about punishing people. It's like, who did something wrong, and how can we punish them for it? And so it's really based in an oppressive system. And that system that historically has really come out of methods of social control. So even the way some crimes, like street crimes, are much more policed than corporate crime. So you have this big difference in terms of how, if you look at the history of the criminal legal system and the history of jailing, it's really about controlling poor communities of color. So it's very steeped in racism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, etc.
It seems like it's just a habit for us to call police, for instance. We don't think about it. So if we can just change that tone, change that way of thinking, and so that we stop and say, well, maybe that's not such a great idea to call the police. Let's do something else.
One of the things that we're working on right now is to make Chicago a restorative justice city. So I think that we're definitely doing restorative justice in the schools. We're doing it in the detention center. We're doing it in the courts. We're doing it with probation. Instead of violating youth on probation, hopefully they're going to be able to do circles, which is a practice of restorative justice.
I think that where we're going with RJ and TJ in Chicago is really developing a collective critical consciousness around how these practices can be used in a daily way. I spend a lot of time traveling and working with groups in other cities, and I'm really impressed with where Chicago is at with TJ and RJ stuff, because we're developing such critical consciousness around it, where it's not just words, it's not just language. We have tiny projects, we have big projects, we have some people who are developing stuff in collective with each other, and some people who are doing stuff in neighborhoods. And I think because we're so neighborhood specific here, we really have the benefit of being able to develop organic, real solutions in our communities that make sense.
I think about sometimes how young people are expelled from school, and people think it's just, well, they don't get along. And then when you have circles where two young women can talk about the reasons why, and then they realize that they have so much in common, and that actually incidents like that can bring them together. I don't know how many times I've seen people who fight and then have a circle actually be friends afterwards. I see youth turning to me and saying, you know what, I have an issue with this person, can we have a circle?
I think the main promise is that we can have communities in which that actually enrich people, that actually put resources into addressing the economic and social reasons why harm happens, whether you're a perpetuator of that harm or whether you are a survivor of that harm.
And I think what's really exciting here in Chicago is the amount of institutional buy-in when you have the head of the Cook County Board saying, I want to close the juvenile detention center. That's very powerful. So that lets then the community work with a lot more hope.
I was amazed to have in our presence folks from CPS, folks from the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center, folks from the State's Attorney's Office, teachers, counselors, substance abuse workers, all these people who in one way or another are making contact with young people, community residents, and people who are in our cities surviving, coping.
What we're trying to do today is bring both restorative and transformative justice practices that are being implemented on the ground in Chicago together with people who are interested so people can learn the practices, learn what's happening in Chicago. Transformative justice has more of a macro lens. So like restorative justice, it might look at an incident of violence, and instead of saying how can we restore it, we might say that actually we don't want to just restore community relationships because there's some underlying power problems within that community, or these problems are more steeped in a systemic issue more than just this individual issue. So it wants to do more than just restore, it wants to transform.
It actually ignited me to think a lot about gentrification in the city and race relations and how I wanted to be involved in community organizing. So I actually took circles back to the graduate school that I work at, and part of what I do there is I facilitate circles around white privilege. It's been really important to have time set aside for students to really reflect on their unconscious and conscious kind of conditioning around racial relations, and it's been a really beautiful process.
From what I've learned and what I've experienced so far, I see a lot of hope. I still think we have a long way to go, specifically getting CPS on board to implement restorative justice citywide. With the united front, there is a lot of promise.
I think the more that the work is being done, then the more people feel like, oh wow, there's something else we could do that actually restores and creates community and has positive outcomes for everybody.
Restorative justice is not just about a practice or a philosophy, it really is a way of life. And as I like to say, every time that we do a circle, I think it's a revolutionary act.